Welcome everyone, this is Manisha. We are taking another chapter of Class 12 Political Science, which is International Organizations. Let's take the overview first. In this chapter, the role of international organization after the collapse of USSR. The potential reforms of UN Security Council is an interesting case of the reforms process and its difficulties. India's involvement in the UN and its view of Security Council reforms. The UN can play any role in dealing with a world dominated by one superpower. In this chapter, we look at some other transitional organizations that are playing a crucial role. Let's start this chapter with a very common question: why international organizations? The United Nations organizations, usually referred to as the UN in the Lebanon crisis in 2006. The UN is generally regarded as the most important international organizations in today's world. It is indispensable and represent the great hope of humanity for peace and progress. International organizations are not the answer to everything, but they are important. International organizations help with matter of war and peace. They also help countries cooperate to make better living conditions for all of us. Countries have conflict and differences each other. They don't doesn't and necessarily mean they must go to war to deal with their antagonists. They can instead discuss contentious issues and find peaceful solutions. An international organization is not a superstate with authority over its member. This as an example, some diseases can only be eradicated if everyone in the world cooperates in calculating and vaccinating their population. Global warming and its effects as atmospheric temperature rises because of the spread of certain chemicals called CFCs. There is a danger that sea levels will also rise, thereby submerging many coastal areas of the world, including huge cities. Unfortunately, recognizing the needs for corporations and actually cooperating are two different things. An international organization can help produce informative and information and ideas about how to cooperate. It can provide mechanism, rules, and a bureaucracy to help members have more confidence that cost will be shared properly. Many governments and peoples that the Western countries led by the US would be so powerful that there would be no check against their wishes and desires. Let's start another topic, which is evolution of the UN. The First World War encouraged the world to invest in an international organizations to deal with conflicts. Many believed that such an organization would help the world to avoid war. As a result, the League of Nations was born. However, despite the initial success, it could not prevent the Second World War 1939 to 45. Many more people died and were wounded in this war than everywhere. UN was founded as a successor to the League of Nations. It was established in 1945, immediately after the Second World War. The organization was set up through the signing of the UN Charter 51 state. UN's objective is to prevent international conflicts and to facilitate cooperation among states. That it would act to stop the conflicts between states escalating into wars. Furthermore, since conflicts after arose from the lack of social and economic development, the UN was intended to bring countries together to improve the prospects of social and economic developments all over the country, all over the world. By 2006, the UN had 192 member states. This included almost all independent states in the UN General Assembly. All members have one veto each. And the UN Security Council, there are five permanent members. There are United States, United Kingdom, Russia, France, and China. These states were the most powerful immediately after the Second World War, and because they constitute the victors in the war. Ban Ki-moon, Secretary General from South Korea. He is 8th Secretary General of the UN Secretary General on 1st January 2007. He is the first Asian to hold the post since 1971. The UN consists of many different structures and agencies, wars and peace, and differences between member states and discussed in the General Assembly as well as the Security Council. UN agencies such as WHO, World Health Organization, UNDP, the United Nations Development Programme, UNHRC, the United Nations Human Rights Commission, UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organizations. Reforms of the UN after the Cold War. Reforms and improvement are fundamental to any organization to serve the needs of a changing environment. There have been demands for reforms of the world body. The basic kind of reforms face the UN. First, reforms of the organization structures and processes. Second, a review of the issues that fall within the jurisdiction of the UN. What they cannot agree on in precisely what is to be done, how it is to be done, and when is to be done. The demand for an increase in the UN Security Council permanent and non-permanent memberships so that the relatives of contemporary world politics are better reflected in the structure of the organizations, proposals to increase membership from Asia, Africa, and South America. Beyond this, the US and other Western countries want to improve in the UN's budget procedure and its administration. Some countries and experts want the organization to play a greater role or more effective role in peace and security in missions. Other wants its role to be confined to development and humanitarian work. UN was established in 1945 immediately after the Second World War. Realities of world politics after the Cold War. After the Cold War, those realities are different. Some of the changes that have occurred, such as USSR has collapsed, US is the strongest power, the relationship between Russia and the successor to USSR and the US is much more cooperative. China is fast emerging as a great power and India is also growing rapidly. The economies of Asia are growing at an unprecedented rate. Many new countries have joined the UN. A whole new set of challenges confronted the world such as genocide, civil wars, ethnic conflicts, terrorism, nuclear proliferations, climatic change, environmental degradation, epidemics. In this situation, in 1989, as the Cold War was ended, reforms of structure and procedures, the UN Security Council. In 1992, the General Assembly adopted a resolution. The resolution reflected three main complaints. First, the Security Council no longer represent contemporary politics realities. Second, its decisions reflect only Western values and interests and are dominated only a few powers. Third, it lacks equitable representations. On 1 January 1997, the UN Security Council Kofi Annan initiated an inquiry how the UN should be reformed. Some of the criteria that have been proposed for the new permanent and non-permanent members of the Security Council. A new member, it has been suggested, should be first a major economic power, second a major military power, third a sustainable contribution to the UN budget, four a big nation in terms of its population, five a nation that respects democracy and human rights. Six, a country that would make the council more representative of the world diversity in terms of geography, economic system, and culture. The developing countries world consists of countries at many different levels of development. Many perceive that veto to be the conflict with the concept of democracy and sovereign equality in the UN, and through that the veto was no longer right or relevant. In the Security Council, there are five permanent members and the 10 non-permanent members. The main privileges of five permanent members are permanency and veto power. The non-permanent member serves for only 2 years at a time and gave way after the period to newly elected countries. A country cannot be re-elected immediately after completing a term of 2 years. Most importantly, non-permanent members do not have veto power. Let's talk about veto power. What is veto power? In taking decision, the Security Council proceeds by voting. All members have one veto. However, the permanent members can veto in a negative manner so that even if all other permanent and non-permanent members veto for a particular decision, any permanent member's negative votes can stall and fall the decision. This negative vote is a veto. There is also a realization that the permanent members are unlikely to agree to such a reform. The world may not be ready for such a radical reforms step even through the Cold War is over. Without the veto, there is a danger, as in 1945, that the great powers would issue interest in the world body, that they would do not want be pleased outside it, and that without their supports and involvement, the body would be ineffective. Let's talk about jurisdiction of the UN. The UN completed 60 years of its existence. The heads of all member states met in September 2005 to celebrate the anniversary and review the situation. The leaders in this meeting decided that the following steps should be taken to make the UN more relevant in changing context. First, creation of a peace-building commission. Second, acceptance of responsibility of the international community in case of failure of national government to protect their own citizens from atrocities. Third, establishment of a Human Rights Commission, operation since 19 June 2006. Fourth, agreements to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. Fifth, condemnation of terrorism in all its forms and manifestations. Sixth, creation of a democracy fund. Seventh, an agreement to find up the trusteeship council. India and the UN reforms. India has supported the restructuring of UN on several grounds. It be believed that the strengthening and revitalized UN is a desirable in a changing world. India also supports on enhanced rule for the UN in promoting developments and cooperation among states. India believed that development should be controlled and central to the UN agenda, as it is a vital precondition for the maintenance of international peace and security. The membership of the UN Security Council was expanded from 11 to 15 in 1965, but there was no change in the number of permanent members. The fact remains that the overwhelming majority of the UN Security Assembly members non-armed developing countries. India argued that they should also have a role in shaping the decisions in the Security Council which affect them. India support an increase in the number of both permanent and non-permanent members. The success of Security Council actions depends upon the political support of the international community. For example, the Security Council should have more developing countries in its. India itself also wishes to be India itself also wishes to be a permanent member in a restructured UN. India is the most second populous countries in the world, comprising almost one-fifth of the population. India is also the world's largest democracy. India has participated in virtually all of the UN. Its role in the UN peacekeeping efforts in a long and sustainable one. The country's economic emergency on the world stage in another footage and perhaps justified India's claims to a permanent seat in the Security Council. India has also made regular financial contribution to the UN and never faltered on its payment. India's wish to be permanent veto-wielding members of the UN. Some countries, for instance, are concerned about other India's nuclear weapons capabilities. Other thinks that the difficulties with Pakistan will make India ineffective as a permanent member. Other feels if India is included, then other emergency powers will have to be accommodated, such as Brazil, Germany, Japan, perhaps even such as Africa, whom they oppose. It may not be very easy for India or anyone else to become a permanent member of the UN in the near future. The UN in a unipolar. In a unipolar world in which the US dominate the UN can and has served to bring the US and the rest of the world from discussion over various issues. US leaders, in spite of their frequent criticism of the UN, do see the organization as serving a purpose in bringing together over 190 nations in dealing with conflicts and social and economic development. UN is an imperfect body, but without it, the world would be worse off. With this, we have come to an end of this chapter. I hope you found this video informative. Till then, catch you guys in the next video. Thank you.